Hi, I'm Ryan, and you're watching my YouTube series on functional programming. In this episode and the next one, I'm going to cover two important concepts. The first is a partially applied function, and the second is a curried function. They are related concepts, but they are still different enough that we need to know when we are trying to use either of them. So let's first talk about what a partially applied function is. We have this function over here called sum, which accepts four arguments and returns their sum. The arity of this function sum is set to be 4, and that means the sum function accepts 4 arguments. An arity of 4 means expectation of 4 arguments. Now let's create a partially applied function. And a partially applied function is something that you do when you want to create a new function which accepts fewer arguments than the original one. So in this case, we're going to create a new function called where sum5 is equal to sum.bind null and 5. So in this case, I've created a new function which is only waiting for the last three arguments, x, y, and z. So the arity of sum5 is 3. I could create another function with an arity of 2. So 5, 4, let's say, and I'm going to call this function sum5, 4. So in this case, sum5, 4 has an arity of 2 because it is only waiting for the last two arguments. So a caller can simply say console.log sum5 and can call it with 4, 3, 2 because it is waiting for three arguments, and a caller over here can simply pass in the last two arguments. In both cases, if I run the application, the output should be the same. So the output is 14 because both of these functions are effectively taking the same values for the arguments. This is something very important to note. The arity of a function, which is the result of a partially applied function, can be anything from 0 to n, where n is the number of arguments it is still expecting to receive. So in this case, it was still sum5 has an arity of 3 because it is still expecting to receive 3 more arguments. Sum5, 4 has an arity of 2, it is still expecting to receive 2 more arguments. And this is very useful in many scenarios because sometimes you just want to partially apply a function and pass it around to the caller, and that's great. This is also an important difference between what a partially applied function is and what a curried function is. Now I will talk more about a curried function in the next video. But for now, I also want to show you something more interesting. You could effectively create a new function with an arity of 0. So 5, 4, 3, 2. So let me call this 5, 4, 3, 2, and let me pass in 3, 2. So now this function has an arity of 0. All I need to do is invoke it. And I effectively get the same output. You would think, why would I even create something like this? If I already have the arguments over here, what's the point? But think about it. What I've actually done is I've created a new function which is ready to be executed, but it hasn't executed yet. So it is onto the caller to invoke this function. So I've effectively delayed the execution of a function from the point when the arguments are known to the point when the caller actually needs it. And this is pretty useful because now the caller does not need to be aware of all the arguments. It just needs to invoke this function when it's required. So this is a nice little trick which you can use to encapsulate certain behaviors if you need to. If you ever run into such a scenario, a partially applied function like this will be handy. Well, that's pretty much it for this video, and stay tuned for the next video where I will talk about a curried function.